This Late Night Linux Family podcast is made possible by our patrons. Go to latenightlinux.com/support for details of how you can join them. Support us on Patreon for access to ad-free episodes and early releases. That's latenightlinux.com/support. 2.5 Admins, episode 259. I'm Joe.
I'm Jim.
And I'm Alan.
And here we are again. I think that we might need a new internet, or at least a new web. Because if you look at the way the web is now, it's all just AI scraping bullshit and an ad tracking nightmare. So my question is, how do we start over? I suppose, do we even need to do this is the fundamental question. And if we were to do it, we would effectively leave the normal people behind.
Isn't that just creating another walled garden? The opposite of what we're trying to break down the walls and not have everything siloed off into Facebook and Google and Microsoft fiefdoms, but have things be independent and open again. So I don't know that creating a new thing and walling off those people is a good plan. But at the same time, it's like, it feels weird to call it the web still when it's not, an index list of websites.
I think it feels more appropriate than ever to call it the web because it's a gigantic sticky ball of yuck.
Mm-hmm.
Genuinely, the web always seemed like a kind of a pretentious, like, where are you really coming from with this metaphor to me in the early days? Because, I don't know, it felt a lot more hierarchical. It felt more like an infinitely extensible ladder than like a web. But now, yeah, it's a place where predators hang out trying to entrap the unwary and feed from them. The web seems really appropriate.
So is the solution just normal HTML sites on the normal internet?
Well, I think to your point, the solution would be an alternative to a web browser that didn't allow all the tracking and so on. But I don't know how you make that commercially viable.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I don't think this has to be commercially viable.
Well, who are you going to pay to build it then?
Well, that's why maybe it should just be built with existing technologies. Like, what if we just all made our own websites that didn't have all the tracking bullshit? But then the problem is they get knocked over by AI scraping bullshit.
Well, also, it's like, how do I make any money if I don't figure out why people leave the website?
And not all of us can even make the websites for ourselves that then get knocked over by the AI scrapers. And the only reason the AI scrapers are knocking over our individual websites anyway, we're not really the target. The people who can't build their own websites are still ultimately the target, even when it's our websites that are getting knocked over. The presence of the people who are basically there to consume but are ultimately apathetic about any responsibility of their own, about any idea of like being integrated into the culture or needing to consume responsibly or have any other real involvement other than this is fun and I do whatever I feel like I'm doing. That's ultimately what leads to the downfall. It started out, it was every September, you got the influx of the new college kids who had not been properly socially acculturated to, the internet in the condition that it was back then. But because you only had a big influx of them every September, you could re-assimilate them because they were never a majority. But once AOL brought internet to the masses all at once, that was the September that never ended. Now the majority of the people on the internet were unacculturated, and because they were the majority, you can't acculturate them. Instead, the culture becomes their culture as it diffuses out into the internet. And just like the internet wasn't really designed for them, they weren't really designed for the internet either, and here we are.
So what can we do about it then?
I don't really have like a concrete answer to that. You're asking a philosophical question about every problem that has ever arisen from having too many people in a system who don't give a crap and don't have assigned roles and don't follow them when they do. How do you make that not suck? I don't know. Nobody's ever figured that out. This is not really a new thing with the internet, Ultimately, we have to have a system where people have well understood places in them and can function in those roles and are willing to function in those roles and are willing to not tolerate and do something about abuse. And we don't have that with the internet. We didn't have that with the telephony system before the internet. We didn't have that with the postal system before that. There have always been Nigerian scam letters. They used to be actual letters that went across the oceans in paper envelopes. But basically, as long as you've got a real reason for predators to exist and you've got a lot of prey milling around who aren't really going to do much to defend themselves, you're going to have this kind of problem.
And short of like hobby projects and so on, what is the point of putting up a website? It's like, I don't mean to sound like an uber capitalist or something, but what's the point of putting up a website if it isn't to make money, to sell something outside of hobby things?
Just because you have something to say, you want to communicate. Maybe you've discovered something that you want to share with people. Maybe something is funny and you just want to talk about it.
I think you're just old and jaded, Alan.
Well, no, like I remember the days like where people hosted IRC server and it was an expense, but they did it anyway because they wanted to make that place. And I still think that's useful. It's just, I don't know how we can get all of the infrastructure you would need to expunge the terribleness from the internet. And in particular, how you don't end up creating more walled gardens and fiefdoms and things that are the opposite of what we actually want, right? We want a bigger federated system, but how do you control the badness when you are purposely trying to have the control be diffuse?
Well, does something like this kind of exist on Tor?
No.
Dear God, no.
But it's something like this, I mean, not this.
Yeah, but I'm saying like it's always the double-edged sword with any kind of like freedom of speech is that we don't want to stop people from doing things just because I don't like them. And once we let people do what they want, then, we need that freedom so that we can do what we want. But there's always going to be somebody who takes it too far. And how do you draw a line that's reasonable between what enough people don't like, but it's also not just the majority gets to kill off all the minorities?
Is it just naive of me then to assume that there is a technological solution to this?
Yes.
Absolutely. This is not a technological problem. This is a human problem, and it will require a human solution. This sounds very glib, but no, I can't tell you what that human solution is because humans haven't figured it out yet. This always happens. When you get too many humans together, the ones who are hell-bent on God, and here we go back again to the anti-cap stuff, but I mean, there's just no way around it. When you get enough humans together, some of those humans will want to accumulate as many resources as possible, and their efforts to do so will disrupt whatever system they inhabit. And if you can't figure out a way to curtail those activities and limit them to reasonable boundaries, you get a big mess. Well, we have a big mess right now. More than 99% of all the traffic across the internet, whether you're talking about web traffic or email traffic, is unwanted spam nonsense. And again, this is not new to computers. It's not new to the internet. We had the same problems with the phone system. We had the same problems with postal mail. We still have those problems with the phone system. We still have those problems with postal mail. When you give predators unlimited access to potential prey, they use it.
Right. And so the solution then is what you are already doing, Jim, with Practical ZFS. Putting up sites that are not full of tracking bullshit, communities for people to get together and learn about a topic, in this case ZFS, and or help other people with their problems and help them to learn about it.
To the degree that there is a solution, sure, but I don't know that solution is really the right word. It's more an alternative, It's a case of being what you want to see in the world. I don't think it's likely that the whole internet is going to be a majority of places like Practical ZFS or, any number of other small sites that are doing what they do because they have a real mission that isn't just making a ton of money. I think that's always going to be kind of niche. It always has been kind of niche, even in that golden age of the internet that, we all tend to get our rose-tinted glasses on remembering when it wasn't absolutely choked with ads and nonsense and celebrity gossip, and it was mostly us nerds just doing nerd stuff and mostly not messing with each other too much. Well, it was that way because we were hanging out with each other. We had mostly excluded a huge swath of like everybody, and that's what made that functional. And I don't think that it's great to exclude everybody, but I do think that there is some value to, having some kind of boundaries, having some kind of sense of separate spaces. I don't think the internet ever really can or should all be one place. Like, it's not the destination, it's a road. And I think we are responsible for maintaining destinations that are worth visiting.
Yeah, but I think to Jim's point, none of the things we have for this type of thing, like whether it's a practical ZFS site or something else, can really handle scaling up to 100,000 people all trying to visit at the same time. It's like not the technical problem of the database and so on. It was just like, how do you usefully moderate that much content where even a dedicated team of people couldn't handle all of the posts and kicking out the people that are being disruptive or spammy or whatever, and making sure that it's still the community that it is when it's the right size. When it gets too big, it just gets unwieldy, and there's, you have that never end of September problem again. Whereas if the number of people joining Practical ZFS every week is scalable, that those people can end up following the existing culture, then that works. But if so many people show up all at once that they're the majority now and they control the culture, then it goes sideways. But at the same time, sometimes you need the culture to change and you have to not be stuck in the right way. And yeah, all of these are human problems. And like Jim said, we had these problems with the mail, where the post office makes money by purposely sending you junk mail, or the phone companies who make money off telemarketing and seem to be not that enthused with stopping it, even when the government says that they have to reduce the number of spam calls that I get. They're like, well, kind of their version of net neutrality and their version of, yeah, but I'm still going to make money off this, means that I get the spam calls anyway.
Turns out those spammers have to pay us a lot of money for the interconnects to get from, wherever their fake location in the Maldives is to, the person they're actually trying to get hold of. And turns out the phone company's not real interested in saying no to their 6 figures worth of payments.
Yeah. Or even my carrier will actually show me a verified by my carrier name if the person who's calling, they're sure that the caller ID is right, not spoofed and so on. It's like, but it doesn't mean that it's not some sales bozo at a company cold calling me manually rather than telemarketing. And they're still bothering me in the same way. It's just they're doing it at a smaller scale where it's not as easy to block at scale.
And that does kind of bring me back to the point of, this is a very human problem. And a lot of it is, what the population will tolerate. It's frustrated me for a very long time that very aggressive, obnoxious, everybody hates it forms of mass marketing have always been tolerated in our society. Nobody's out there saying, you know what, I love it when I'm sitting down with the family for dinner and the phone rings and it's somebody trying to sell me vinyl siding. Nobody likes that. Nobody wants that other than the freaking sales Vikings that are out there trying to push their vinyl siding and windows and whatever other crap, contributions to political action communities, whatever, this insatiable appetite. They are the only ones who want that. But the people who are annoyed about it, the ones who are preyed upon, the ones who are receiving these calls, the ones whose parents are getting grifted, we all don't like it. But we're not doing anything real about it to make it stop. If we really had the political will, none of these things are technologically insurmountable. We could make it stop. But the real answer is there's enough money in it that the money resists the political pressure.
Let's do some free consulting then. But first, just a quick thank you to everyone who supports us with PayPal and Patreon. We really do appreciate that. If you want to join those people, you can go to 2.5admins.com/support. And remember that for various amounts on Patreon, you can get an advert-free RSS feed of either just this show or all the shows in the Late Night Linux family. And if you want to send in your questions for Jim and Alan or your feedback, you can email show@2.5admins.com. Christopher writes, our new house has an attached garage. I've been eyeing some space in there as a place to put my collection of servers. It would be pretty easy to run all the cables to the garage, and the fiber connection is already there. I could get a half rack or something too. However, the garage isn't climate controlled, but I live in the Pacific Northwest where the winters and summers are mild. But my wife has her woodworking equipment set up in the garage. Any suggestions on how to make the space work for both servers and saws? How do I stop the sawdust from choking the machines? Do I need to worry about the computers and the power tools being on the same circuit? Do I save myself a bunch of headaches and keep the servers inside the house?
I personally would not try to put my servers in the garage. I would probably be willing to put network equipment, like switches and what have you in a non-climate controlled garage, but not so much the servers. With that said, in a Pacific Northwest climate, If your servers are not actually built to live in a data center, they will probably be okay with ambient temperatures up to around 85 Fahrenheit, and you're very unlikely to have a winter too cold for them. Humidity might be a little bit more of a concern, but again, you can probably get away with it. Is it worth it? I don't think so, but I don't live in your house. I don't know how much space you've got. So let's move on to some of the other potential issues next. The sawdust is really not as big of an issue. You're already talking about, potentially putting in like a half rack. Really, you just need to put one in that's got filtration and you're good to go. That'll keep the sawdust out. However, you mentioned the saws potentially being on the same electrical circuit, and that is absolutely something that you do not want to tolerate, put up with, or risk. I have seen any number of companies have their servers go offline at quote random unquote times 3 or 4 times a week, only to discover that their server happened to wind up on the same circuit that somebody keeps plugging a circle saw into, out in a workshop. And when that happens, you really don't want your servers on the same circuits as any kind of like heavy motor equipment. That can mean, obviously, woodworking tools, any other kind of saws. It can mean industrial paint sprayers.
Even in an office environment, it can mean a vacuum cleaner.
Absolutely. Even a refrigerator is not the best idea to have on the same circuit as your servers, because anything with a big electric motor in it, when that electric motor kicks on, we've talked about startup current on the show before. Now, we usually talk about startup current in the sense of like spinning hard drives up or down and how much more power that hard drive pulls for that fraction of a second when you first tell it to spin all the way up to 7,200 RPM from start. Well, if we talk about that in the sense of a hard drive that normally only consumes a watt or two, what do you think happens when you're first firing up a circle saw that pulls a few hundred watts? It's a lot of current, and you will absolutely cause a brownout on that circuit. That typically is not going to hop the boundary from one circuit, meaning like one breaker in the panel in your breaker box. You're usually not going to have an impact going from one circuit to a different circuit. But all the outlets on that same circuit with the big electric motor that just kicked up, they're going to see voltage drop by sometimes as much as 20 or 30 volts for a few milliseconds, and that can absolutely be enough to cause serious problems in computer equipment.
Yeah, have you ever been in a situation where the lights are plugged into the same circuit as the circular saw, and every time you fire it up, the lights just dim slightly?
Yep,
for sure.
That's what we're talking about. Now, to some degree, a UPS can also help insulate you from this, but that's going to be a lot of additional wear and tear on that UPS as well, and a UPS is a lot like a bulletproof vest. If you're going to get into a firefight, you absolutely want a bulletproof vest. But just because you own a bulletproof vest doesn't mean you should be looking for a firefight to get into. You can still get shot in the head, the arms, the legs. A protective device is not the same thing as that imaginary force field that the most annoying kid on the playground used to yell every time they were about to lose a playground game.
Yeah, the other thing there is just worrying about the capacity of the circuit, right? If you're looking at a standard, North American 15 amp circuit, if you're running a power saw on that while the computers were already drawing like half the capacity of the circuit, you could easily keep popping the breaker, and that'll get really annoying. So you're definitely better off having a dedicated circuit for it. And it's really not that big of a thing to get an extra circuit installed. Like I had a completely separate circuit put in this office here for this machine because the outlets on the outside wall of my house that was built in the 50s aren't properly grounded. So I had a brand new surface-mounted circuit added just for my computer in this room.
Although in Christopher's particular situation, I do have to say, if your servers are drawing half the capacity of a 15-amp circuit, no, you should not put those servers in a non-climate controlled space. That's a bad idea. They're not going to like that.
Yeah, at 110 volts, that's 825 watts, man.
Yeah, and it's not 110 either. It's 120.
So that's 900 watts then.
You're only allowed to use 80% of the 15 amps continuous. So you shouldn't be going over 12 amps continuous. So half is only 6 amps. But yes, if you're filling a half rack with machines, you're going to use that much power.
It really depends on the machines. There is a huge difference between a half rack of Dell PowerEdge pizza boxes versus a half rack of like stuff you built out of commodity desktop hardware.
Well, the biggest thing I think that makes a difference for me is the number of hard drives. You get 80 plus hard drives fitting and it uses a lot of power.
Normal people don't have 80 hard drives in their house, Alan.
However, normal people frequently do buy, surplus data center grade servers that are just absolutely packed chock full of fans that spin at, like drill press velocity 24/7 all the time and draw an incredible amount of power compared to like normal computing equipment. I used to have a junior sysadmin working for me, And he got really, really excited when we did a server upfit at one of my clients. And the client no longer had a use for one of those Dell Power Edges that, it's like a bank vault. It's a really weird form factor. It just kind of sits on the floor as this giant hulking box. It's not rack mount. It's not tower. It's this gigantic thing. And he thought it was the coolest thing ever. And he wanted to put it in his garage and run it. And he did for about a month until he saw what his power bill looked like. Just the difference from plugging in that one server in his garage. He could see the difference in his power bill, and he turned the damn thing off again.
Well, I ran into this when we first installed some of these new 80-core ARM servers in our rack. And it's like, all right, they're ARM, they're low power, right? Why are these 4 servers drawing more power than like the 10 AMD servers we had in there? But it turned out that their BMC defaulted to the fans running at like 80% or more. And so they were doing like 12,000 RPM on these 2U fans. And when we turned the duty cycle of the fans down to 40%, the power dropped by 750 watts across the 4 machines.
Wow.
Yeah, if you turn on the server and it goes, wah, trust me, that's a lot of power and a lot. The hilarious thing is it's not only a lot of power, those fans are generating a lot of heat inside the case. There's no way around that. You consume the power, you generate the heat. So they're relying on moving their own heat out of the case along with whatever heat, the actual equipment in the case generates. But either way, you're talking about, you're talking about systems that are not going to be happy about high ambient temperatures. And you're talking about systems that are going to pull a lot of power. So if that's the kind of stuff that you're putting in a half rack, don't put it in the garage. Also, don't put it in your house because that's going to be a nightmare to live with. Just build lower power systems. You'll be happier. And honestly, the data center grade stuff, just because it says data center on it and it's got fans on there that sound like a drill press, doesn't mean it's higher performance than something you built out of consumer parts. That's something that I've found surprises a lot of people who haven't worked with the bigger iron. It's not necessarily all that performant, and especially not for the kind of workload you're likely to be doing in your house. The Dell Power Edge, bank vault thing I was talking about that my former employee got all excited about and set up in his garage, it was theoretically fast for when it was new, mostly because it had, for the time, a lot of cores. But if you don't have a massively parallel workload, a massively parallel CPU is not going to be fast for what you're really doing.
At the same time, I wouldn't necessarily be turned off by the surplus server stuff. When it's the right price and it's going to fit, it's fine. And in particular, the data center stuff often is purposely run at higher ambient temperatures because the air conditioning is more efficient when the air temperature is 80 degrees and it's cooling it from there. And so a lot of that stuff will be fine at the higher temperatures, but if you have a lower temperature, you can get away with running the fan at a much lower speed and not having that level of noise. Because yes, if you don't have an enclosed room that you can close the door on to keep the noise out, then it becomes very annoying to live with that data center style hardware.
Where are you finding these 85-degree data centers, Alan? I don't think I've ever been in a proper data center that I didn't need a freaking parka to spend much time in it.
A lot of them now purposely run very hot or have hot aisle containment.
Yeah, around the back of it's hot, right? The front is cold, but the back is hot.
Yeah, but even when the front's cold, it's usually not as cold anymore because it turns out it makes the air conditioner work harder for no reason. You can get more total cooling out of the same air conditioning by not lowering the temperature too much or by having the bigger delta between the temperatures.
Well, I hope that word spreads farther and wider than it has so far because I'm still personally not encountering anything but the traditional Arctic tundra style data centers.
The one where you get pneumonia from going back and forth between the front and the back of the rack?
I really wasn't kidding about, wearing a parka to work in the data center for a while. There are several local data centers that I have had the pleasure and or displeasure to work in, up to and including Clemson University's and USC's data centers. They sync a lot of data back and forth between each other. And yeah, like if you're going to spend much time in there, you better have some pretty heavy layers because it's freaking cold. Which reminds me, for that matter, of the data centers that they used to keep the mini computers in, back when I was in the Navy in the 90s. They would typically be down around 50 or 60 degrees. And maybe there's some modern stuff that's happy running 85. But let me tell you what, if you've got a Honeywell mini computer on your boat and the ambient temperature goes much over 55, that thing's going to shut down.
Yep. Yeah, a lot of the news, especially The things like the blade servers and so on were always, the fans would purposely turn down and try to keep it at an optimal temperature where it was always a lot harder than I thought was sane.
Right, well, we'd better get out of here then. Remember, show@2.5admins.com if you want to send any questions or your feedback. You can find me at joelrest.com/mastodon.
You can find me at mercenarysysadmin.com.
And I'm at Alan Jude.
We'll see you next week.